I highlighted that. I talked about how that we were going to look at the sacred names, the nomina sacra or the nomina divina, and I'll just tell you off the top of my head real quick what these are. What are the sacred nomina sacra? They're Latin for sacred names, and they're basically the idea that just like in Judaism, the Jewish people who wanted to preserve the name of God by not writing it out used either circumlocutions like Adonai, or they used shorthand like Yud, like we find in a bunch of Bibles today that are written in Hebrew. They used a double Yod for the Tetragrammaton name, which should be Yod He Vav He, but they removed the He and the Vav, leaving just Yod, and it's shorthand for Yod He Vav He, but there's typically some kind of code or key that's understood by the scribals family that this is a shortened form of the divine name of God. We just want to put it in such a way that it cannot be misused or blasphemed or by people who might discover this text and try and pronounce God's name in a non-sacred way, etc. Well, the Christians were doing the same thing as well with the Greek scriptures, and so the nomina sacra ended up with the Greek, instead of saying kurios, what they would end up doing, let me scroll down to the text and you can see it, into this commentary. What they would end up doing, you can see right here, is for God, let's try that again. For God, theos, in the Greek, they would simply write the first letter and then a representative of the last letter S, the sigma, written in all caps with a letter C. Or they would just write it as the capital theta and then the capital letter for sigma, which looks like a capital Y to us, to the people who can't read Greek. Looks like a capital O and a capital Y. You can see that right there. So that's theos. So that's one version for God. They just took out the middle letters. For Lord, which should be in all caps, is kurios right there. We write it in this uppercase and lowercase like that. They abbreviate that as either capital K for the first Greek letter, and then the capital C for the final capital letter in Greek, or sometimes it looks like a KY, like the acronym for the initials for the state of Kentucky, right? KY. But actually that's the first Greek letter and the last Greek letter. So for Christ, the same thing. Christos becomes capital X and capital C, or sometimes capital X, capital Y. And then Jesus, which is Jesus, is capital I and then capital C, like there, or capital I and capital Y, like that. Okay, so what's the point? Is that when we turn to these types of Greek manuscripts, like I've got pulled up right here, you can see on your screen, this is actually Psalm 110, verse 1, as quoted from the Matthew passage where Yeshua is arguing with the Pharisees. Why did David call him Lord when he quotes the Lord said to my Lord? Matthew 22 verse 43. And so the Greek says apen kurios to kurio mu kathu ek desion mu heos an thu tu ek thrusu hupa kadon tonto tone do su. Sorry, the Greek's a little different that I'm reading here on the right side of the screen. I'm not reading the actual script that I was just reading a moment ago. And this is all caps, and this is really hard to read, but I think you can see that if I click on the highlight for the word kurios, see the red on my screen right now? See the red square surrounding those two letters? If you look at the two letters that say KC, above those two letters, there's this line. That line is the sacred nomina sacra. They would put underlines, not underlines, but superscripts above the two letters. First, they shortened it, made it into kind of shorthand, and then they also, these were the Christians that were doing this, they put a line above it that was kind of a code for them to say this was a divine name. So when Jesus is quoting Psalm 110:1, the Lord says unto my Lord, the apen is said, and then the very next word, the KC, is the Lord. That corresponds to the Hebrew Yahweh. So this is obviously a divine figure because it's Yahweh himself. So that's the first kurios. But notice in the second kurios, which looks like kurio because it's to kurio mu. So it's got two different Greek letters, but it's still a capital K and then a capital O, which looks like a capital W to us. Looks like KW. But notice the little line. Can you see that on your screen? I'll blow this up in post-production for you as well. But it's KW, which corresponds to kurio, the capital letter for K, and then the O letter. and it looks like a W to us, but notice the line above it. This is the Christian's way of saying this is a divine person. To us, we recognize this Lord as divine. So this is just another commentary to the text. I realize this is not what the original Masoretes wrote. And it is also not, as I understand it, what perhaps the non-Christians might have written, but at least it represents, and this is a very old text that I'm showing you. This is, I think, this is the Codex Sinaiticus, which is a very, very old original text going back to the 1st and 2nd century. But at least it shows that a long time ago, already we had this idea that Jesus is divine. He is the second Lord in the Psalm passage, and he's a divine figure. And also you have to remember as well that when we're talking about the 1st century Christian heresies that were challenging the 1st century church, that one of the very first early Christological controversies had to do with whether or not Jesus was human, not whether or not he was divine like today. So here's the point I'm trying to make. We have Arianism that exists in the world today, but Arianism is a denial of Jesus' divinity. It says that Jesus was not divine. It's a form of stripping Jesus of his full divinity. It says that Jesus is a creature. He was created by God. He does not share the full deity that God does. It lowers him in some way. It's a lower form of Christology. But Arianism is not the first heresy or Christological challenge to the 1st century church. It, in fact, was Docetism, which is actually a denial of Jesus' humanity. In other words, Jesus was fully accepted primarily as divine, and even so much so that there was some questions about his humanity. In other words, Docetism says he wasn't even human. He was fully divine, so much so that his body was actually just a phantom. It was an appearance of a human, but actually he was truly fully divine, fully God, fully deity. And that's heretical as well, because the incarnation accepts the reality that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. It balances both of them out, fully, truly, both of them at the same time, two natures. And yet Docetism says, nope, he's fully divine, and Arianism says, nope, he's actually just a creature. He's fully human, or he's a creature in that regard. The Jehovah's Witnesses take that a step further and say, well, he's the first creature created by God at the beginning of creation, which means he can't even be truly, fully human. But, that's just kind of a weird way of thinking of Jesus. Nevertheless, I brought that up to remind you that it's Docetism that preceded Arianism as one of the first Christological controversies in the 1st century, which means Biblical Unitarian, which is a Johnny-come-lately form of the early version. I can't remember what they originally were called, but Sabellianism, if I remember. You guys are coming along later trying to argue for the fact that Jesus is fully human. The early first Christians were, just like this Nomina Sacra shows, they were following after what they considered to be a fully divine human. So those are some details that we're looking at. But in closing, as I'm drawing this study to a close, since I really ran out of time, I wanted to talk more about the fact that, and I'll just kind of park on this for a moment, is Jesus human or is he divine? The Bible teaches both. Look at these 3 bullet points. Point number 1, the Lord swore to David a firm oath that he would not renounce one of your own issue I will set upon your throne. Notice that in the Psalm 132:11 reference here, that God is promising David a human ancestor. One of your ancestors will sit on the throne. There's nothing in the verse that indicates that this ancestor would be divine or more than human. David could understand this promise here from God to be fully human, just like Solomon was fully human. He was an offspring of David, right? He was a son of David. One of your own issue I will set upon your throne. David's human, therefore my offspring will be human. No problem. But notice what begins to happen in the biblical text as God develops these promises to David, and we show that we find them in other places in the Psalms as well as other scriptures. Look at the 2nd bullet point. Let me tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, this is the Messiah, the King Messiah talking about God his Father, you are my son, I have fathered you this day. Now we begin to realize that yes, this could still be a human king, but there are definitely hints and what can we say, God's way of tipping his hand a bit towards the human authors that this son of mine will be more than human. You are my son. Today I have fathered you. I have begotten you. And it's the whole monogenes word where you are the only begotten. You are the unique son of God, not the only one who is the son, and certainly not begotten in the sense of humans beget other humans. But when God says you are my begotten son, like we know the famous verse, God sent John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. The word begotten there is the only one of a class, the only unique son of God. And indeed, Yeshua is in a class all by himself, being truly human and truly God. But notice the final bullet point. Clearly, the figure in this final bullet point is more than human. How do we know that? But he is human, but he's more than human. Why? Notice the verbiage. And this is still speaking of the same future king of Israel that would sit on the throne, right? The offspring of David. Notice what God says. This time, I think Solomon is part of the context, but David is also caught in there. When your days are done and you follow your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. So God telling David that Solomon will come after you, but there will be more. Your offspring after you, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own sons. I will establish his kingship. So there's the human part. He shall build a house for me, right? Solomon built God's house because David didn't. And what does God say? And I will establish his throne. How long? Forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. So we have language that just pulled from the book of Psalms where he says, you are my son, I've fathered you. And we have language that's pulled from the previous Psalm 132:11, where David is told this promise that this will be a son from your own issue, and I'll establish his throne. But notice the kicker clause where God says, I will establish his throne forever. David's throne wasn't established forever with David sitting on it, and neither was Solomon's. But when God says, I will establish his throne forever, not your throne, David, forever. If God would have said, I will establish your throne forever, then perhaps God was telling David that there will always be a king to sit on your throne, David. It's your throne, but you'll always have offspring to sit on your throne, meaning just one human after another, even though they'll be born, raised, and die, nevertheless, they'll be from your lineage. It'll be your throne, but the kings that'll sit on it will just be occupying the place that's your throne. But that's not what God says. He says, I will establish his throne. Now, I know you're thinking, Ariel, are you building all your theology off of one little pronoun? No, I'm not. The point I'm trying to establish is that when God says his throne forever, this is also reminiscent of the Daniel passage where the Son of Man approaches the Ancient of Days, and it's the throne of the Son of Man that's established forever and ever. And also in the book of Revelation, when John sees the Lamb who sits on the single throne of the one who sits on the throne, which is God the Father, one throne, but there's the Father and the Lamb, and the Lamb is also worshipped. The worship is forever and ever, right? So the point I'm trying to highlight is that in noticing the word his there, that it's his throne, the focus shifts slightly from David realizing that this is my throne to actually that this is actually the Messiah's throne that I'm actually occupying, right? He's my offspring, so he's my junior in that regard. But just like Yeshua brought up in the Matthew passage that we've been referencing, this Lord is greater than me. Number one, he's greater than me because he's Lord. He's Adonai. Or if you want to say he's Adonai according to the Masoretes, fine. But nevertheless, he's greater than me, David says. The Lord says to the Lord of me, he's my Lord. He's greater than me. But also, his throne is forever. David's throne is not, by comparison, David probably wouldn't think that his throne was forever. Rather, David would understand that he would always have an offspring of his occupying the throne. But ultimately, it's God's throne that God gives to the human king or gives to the divine king. God gave David his throne. God gave Yeshua his throne. But in the case of Yeshua, unlike David, the throne will be established forever under this Messiah's name, as is corroborated and verified by other passages, like the Daniel 7 passage where the Son of Man gets a throne and a kingdom forever, and the Revelation passage where John sees the Lamb and the one sitting on the throne, the Father, and they are enthroned forever, etc., etc. It's not David who's enthroned forever and ever. It's only the Messiah who's enthroned forever and ever. So basically, we've run out of time, but I believe I've given enough information for us to come to a very, look at that one, service unavailable. Yeah, there was this argument from Dr. Michael Brown that I wanted to show you, but suddenly their website doesn't work on me. I think we've given enough information, so we'll just park my picture there. In closing, what we've come to the conclusion is that Jesus is fully human. So any Old Testament passages that talk about his humanity, even if it does say Adonai, people, even if it does say Adoni, even if it said Adoni in Psalm 110, the Lord said to my Lord Adoni, even if it does say that, no problem for we Trinitarians. Why? Jesus is fully human. Yeah, he's fully human. He just happens to be fully divine as well. So, biblical Unitarian, listen up for a moment. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to close my argument here. We'll shut down the study, and we'll close in prayer, and that's it. Your argument for a human Jesus does not deny Jesus' divinity. It is not an argument against the Trinity. It is not an argument that denies this divinity by declaring that he is fully human. Why? Because we agree that he's fully human as well. He's fully human and truly human. Not like the Docetic say, where he's just a phantom human. And he's not fully God in the sense that he loses his humanity. Rather, and he's not like what you guys say, he's fully human and he loses his divinity. No. We Trinitarians believe he's fully and truly human, and he's fully and truly divine. Therefore, your argument about him being human from the book of Psalms here, the Lord said to my human Jesus, sorry, that just tells me only half the picture that I already agree with, that he's truly human. That's it. Even if David was saying a human, yeah, no problem. I don't have a problem with that as a Trinitarian. Tell me something I don't know. What you should tell me is show me and refute unquestionably how Jesus being fully human proves that he can't be divine. Right? How does that work? Nope, that doesn't work, because even in your own admission, God can incarnate himself, even if it's at brief moments, like the Genesis 18 passage where he became a man and was served food by Abraham. Right? From Abraham's perspective, he looked like a human being. Right? Indeed, so did the angels as well. So was God just like appearing as a human? Did he truly become a human? Was it an incarnation? Well, it wasn't an incarnation, but it was a theophany, and it was a theophany in a human form because he ate. Right? His body functioned the way normal humans function. He wasn't pretending to eat. He actually ate the food. Rabbinic Judaism thinks that he just pretended to eat. He put the food to his mouth and he made the mouth motions, but he didn't actually swallow anything. He just imitated motion eating. But nope, as far as I can tell, the text, if I take it at face value, he theophanized into a human. I'm creating a word. Theophanized? Is that a word? No, I don't think so. He turned himself into a human just for a brief moment and chatted with Abraham, and then turned himself back into God and went up to heaven, right? Plus, the last thing I want to point out is this, and we'll talk about this in future verses. A biblical Unitarianism, I'm not questioning your valid claims to being Christians. I'm not doing that. Your belief in Jesus as a human does not negate your statement about that you believe unto him for salvation. As far as I can tell, you guys are genuinely saved, and you are my brothers, and I welcome you as my brothers. You just are only seeing half the picture as to who your Lord and Savior truly is. That's one thing. The other thing I want to say, and then I will close, is that in future passages, and I'm sure we'll bring this up, you want to tell me that Jesus is fully human, truly human, and only human, like all other humans are. And yet Jesus, in his own words, I don't have to bring this up now, but you know the verses I'm talking about, Jesus in his own words declares that he is the one who came down from heaven. He is the bread that came down from heaven, and he's not just speaking metaphorically. He also says in other places that no one has descended except the one who, no one will ascend except the one who has descended, namely himself. No one has gone up into heaven except the one who already came down. So in multiple places, not just by Yeshua himself, but also other writers attest to the fact, like Paul, talk about that Jesus is the one who came from his Father. How could he be fully human if he came from heaven? Humans don't come from heaven. We come from women. Just like you guys admit that Jesus came from his mom, Mary. I mean, I came from my mom, unless you're a test tube baby, right? But I mean, Adam and Eve are kind of the exception because they came directly from God. But even in that example, they're not declared as coming from heaven. They came from the dirt, right? God whipped up the humans from the dust of the ground. What's the point I'm trying to emphasize? Jesus declares that he came from heaven. That means if he came from heaven, that means he's not human the way we are. He's not the same type of humanity that we are. His birth, or his existence, I should say, predates his birth. right? Which is exactly what John says earlier. In the beginning was the Word was with God in the beginning, prior to the creation, and therefore the Word was God as to his nature, full deity. And it is this Word that became flesh, right? There's the incarnation, there's the virgin birth that John describes. It's that bread that came down from heaven. He's that one that is the true Son of God who came from heaven, who has fully God's divine nature, and yet he wrapped himself in humanity, just like Philippians chapter 2 talks about the Carmen Christi, where he lowered himself a little lower than the angels for a short while. And just like I was going to say there's a reference in the book of Revelation, but off the top of my head, I just lost it. My choo-choo got derailed. So we'll stop there. That'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism.